Hey, welcome back to another Story Better podcast. I'm your host. My name is Nick, and here at the Story Better podcast, we believe that better stories lead to brighter futures. Hey, happy 2025 to you. If you're watching this in the January timeframe, I'm so excited to get on with a new year. This year is going to be great, and I know there's a lot of crazy stuff happening right now. And so, at the time of this recording, the Los Angeles fires is pretty gnarly, and just a lot of things can seem like a little topsy-turvy with new president, all the things happening. And so all that to say, it's time that we start to tell better stories. Here at the Story Better podcast, we look at internal narrative through three lenses. It's through marketing, through script writing, and through narrative psychology. And today is going to be something that's a bit different. Something we haven't done in quite a long time is taking a look at movies and how movies actually shape the way that we think and the stories that we tell. And so this is movies about internal narrative. And so I want to talk about 4 movies that I think are really good that you should check out that will help inform the idea of internal narrative. And so if you don't know what an internal narrative is, it's essentially the story we tell ourselves about ourselves and the world around us. And the reason that this is so important is because story influences everything we think in story. Even if we don't think we think in story, we are very, very, very much emotional creatures that use our emotions to make our decisions, and then we use logic to back them up. And so in order for us to get a little bit better, a little bit sharper when it comes to the story that we tell ourselves and making sure that we're not drowning in our own emotions, or we're not in a place to where everything that we do is, just influenced the entire wrong way, it would just be so much better if we got a grasp of our internal narrative. And the reason that I am so passionate about this is back in 2016, I wrote a book called The Storytelling Heart, and it essentially looks at the hero's journey and how the hero's journey can help us move through our own internal narrative to structure, to clean house, to have that mental clarity, if you will. And so that's very, very important. A lot of things that I look at is somatic integration. How can we use our diet? How can we use exercise? How can we use journaling and community? The 4 basic pillars of a strong internal narrative to be better. So let's hop into those movies. I will say this number 1 movie is one that I watch year over year. Every December or the first week of January, I watch this movie. It's called The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. It's directed by Ben Stiller. And in this film, Walter Mitty is somebody who just is really, overwhelmed with his own daydreams. His fantasy life is way more vivid than his real life, and this leads to a lot of problems. The reason that this is so good, because it talks about internal narrative, is you have this almost seamless switch between what is real and what is fantasy. And a lot of the film critics at the time did not like this film. The reason they didn't like this film is because the switch between what was narrative and what was fantasy was almost so seamless that it would feel like a bit of absurd. Like you would have this absurdism that would be within that movie. But what's really interesting is I feel that absurdism really highlights fantasy without action. And so when it comes to the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves and the world around us, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty follows that hero's journey to the T. I'll explain a little bit of the storyline so you can keep up if you haven't seen it. If that's something you want to watch, there will be spoilers, so you might want to pause this, go watch it, and then come back. Let's move on. So the premise of the story is Time magazine is getting acquired, and in its acquired state, it has new leadership. Their executive leadership team has been fired, and in is this couple of guys who come in for the transition, and they're very unkind. They're very hyper corporate, and it really starts to highlight how Walter Mitty has been playing it safe. And the reason that it highlights Walter playing it safe is because he's had the same job for 16 years doing the same thing over and over again. That allows him not to pay a lot of attention and focus, but to do something that is mundane and repetitive and live in a fantasy land. So what this does is this inciting incident puts him in the hot seat because the new leadership and new management has been told Walter Mitty actually has the last photo for the cover of the final Time magazine. And this is really, really huge. This is, his time to shine. And it turns out he can't find it. So he goes on a journey to find it. And what you can see through his journey is that he is very, very doubtful of his own abilities. He is very doubtful of himself. He does not have an internal locus of control. He does not have confidence. He is actually what I would consider the prototype for anybody who needs internal narrative change. And he is just so much more comfortable fantasizing than actually doing that it is very, very obvious. And this is highlighted in his romantic relationships. He has none, and he's trying online dating and even fails at online dating. And so as the movie progresses, one of the things that brings The Secret Life of Walter Mitty to my top 5 lists of internal narrative is going to be the way that it handles the transition from fantasy world into reality. This is a flop from what normal movies do. A lot of time, what movies do is they establish themselves in a credible world and take you to an incredible world. What's beautiful is how The Secret Life of Walter Mitty flips that on its head and takes you from this fantasy land into a real world. And a couple of key takeaways that I think you would benefit from is that developing an internal locus of control, taking control of your life, actually starts with action. It doesn't start with your ideas. It doesn't start with you trying a new mantra. You actually have to go out there, try things, and do things. The second thing is it shows that a team is very, very helpful. One thing that Walter is very keen on is he's okay relying on other people for information. He's okay with looking to others for them to play their role in helping him out. And so Walter is very, very okay with seeking out help, which is very, very phenomenal in my opinion. And the third and final thing that I will say is he becomes an authentic version of himself. And if you know anything about Adolf Adler and Adlerian psychology, authentic and community feel are very, very important things in Adlerian psychology. And the reason for that is you have to be able to present yourself. You cannot present yourself in a way that is dumbed down, that is tailored to specific people. That's very, very inauthentic. And so living authentically is something that is very, very difficult for a lot of people. And Adolf Adler knew this, and he put it within his own psychology. And you can see that in The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, the character of Walter Mitty is authentically becoming himself. And it's just it's a great, great story. It has a few funny moments in there, a few heartfelt moments, but all in all, I will say the cinematography is great. It's directed by Ben Stiller. So if you like Severance and are waiting for that Severance season 2, you know what you're getting into. The final thing I will say is that it has a lot of interesting motion graphics. The way that the motion graphics are embedded, you could easily miss it because it is so seamless. And I will say to the team that created The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, while you did not get the credit you deserved on the theatrical release, I think there is a lot of people who are looking to this movie as being one of the slow films, the feel-good movies, or the slice of life films that are starting to define this current generation when it comes to movies about internal narrative. The second movie is probably, I would say, the capstone of slow film, feel-good movie, or slice of life film. And this is Perfect Days by Wim Wenders. What is fascinating about this movie is its ability to be a meditation and a film all at the same time. When I talk about meditation, this movie is slow. It is repetitive. You can almost feel like, haven't I seen this before, even within the first 10 or 20 minutes? But that is the beauty of it. Wim is asking you to take stock of your life, and this is a very, very slow film. This follows a man who is older in age, and his passion in his current season is cleaning toilets. He works for the Tokyo Toilet Department, and he drives his van around Tokyo cleaning some of the most beautiful toilets. And so I will say Wim did have a great idea, because these toilets architecturally are beautiful, and on camera, the cinematography just comes through. And because of their angles and their shapes and the different nature of how different they are, these toilets almost represent humanity in this aspect of we are all different with cultures and shapes and sizes and functions. It's just a really, really deep meditation, but it's also very, very accessible for a lot of people. What is really interesting is there's not a lot of tension within this movie. The tension, when it does come, it is really deep, and it is centered around what I would consider shame and also socioeconomic status. And so as you progress through the movie, one of the highlights is how this toilet cleaner is so introverted, but even in his own introverted state, he has a vast amount of knowledge in his reading. He has a vast collection of music that is just something that he enjoys. He's a photographer, and the way that he looks at trees is one of the most childlike, humble things that I have ever seen captured on film. It's really, really beautiful and really, really moving. What Perfect Days is asking you to do, it's asking you to slow down. It's asking you to take stock and inventory of your life, because it is a meditation on what are the most beautiful things. You follow the main character for, I would consider, like 2 weeks. You see him have his weekends. But what's really interesting is he doesn't wake up to an alarm clock. There's something innate in him that wakes up and wants to invest in cleaning toilets. So much so, he has his own gear, he has his own van, and the other characters who do clean toilets recognize how he is almost 1,000 times more invested than they ever will be. He meets a bunch of other great characters, and the pivotal moment of this of the film comes when he has to come face to face with his sister, and you start to realize that his family is very affluent. They are wealthy, and his father holds the keys to the kingdom in some regards, in some aspects, but his dad is probably suffering from a lot of dementia. And there are undercurrents of what I would consider family strife or even abuse, verbal abuse or physical abuse, that rears its head in some of the subtext of the conversations. And what's really important when it comes to handling these things, Wim Wenders doesn't address it at all, but he does show the emotional impact of these things. And what this allows us to do, it allows us to see a character who has decided that he would much rather live a small, quiet, simple life and potentially be shamed by his family and the rest of his society, but to still pursue what he loves, which is, going out to eat at some of his favorite restaurants, reading great books, taking time at the bathhouse, and really just living a slow life at his own pace. Perfect Days is a 10 out of 10 for me. I would highly suggest you go check it out. It is phenomenal. The third movie about internal narrative would be Soul. This is by Pete Docter and Kent Powers. One thing I will say about this movie is it did come out on Disney Plus during the pandemic, and so I think a lot of people associate this with one of those movies that wasn't good enough for a theatrical release, but that's not true. Pete Docter is a genius. He is behind some of the best Pixar films, and Pete is historically known as a troublemaker of a director. He was actually given his first project so that he would be quiet and not make so much stir within the Pixar organization. What's interesting about Soul is it has a beautiful voice acting lineup. Jamie Foxx is the main character, and the main character is really a teacher who has been struggling his entire life to make ends meet, but still pursuing his passion of music making. And so there comes this point in this teacher's life where he has to decide if he's going to take a full-time job and teach music, which is his passion, but it would also mean that he has to give up on his gigging and some other things. He couldn't do his tours. And lo and behold, he meets an untimely demise. And as he moves to, the next stage of the afterlife, that's a really weird statement. But as he moves to that place, he starts to see the behind the scenes of how the universe works. And essentially souls are, dropped into Earth. And there's a seminar that happens that acquaints souls to go to Earth. And one of the souls, it's 22. 22 doesn't want to live. 22 is nihilist in all aspects and believes that it's better to not exist than to have gone through existence. And through a series of events, 22 and the teacher find their way back to Earth. And as they find their way back to Earth, they go through a lot of different transitions. But what this teaches 22 is that living is worth it just for the experience. a couple of things that 22 discovers is the love of pizza and food, the ability to look at trees and just see how trees and shadows and just how this amazing ecosystem of nature works, and just to be in awe of it, as well as candy and the connections that souls can have, like going to a barber shop. And so the thing about internal narrative is a lot of times we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, like the teacher, to be very, very successful. And sometimes we define success based upon other people's terms. We do not come to the realization that an intrinsic value is going to mean more to us than an external validation. And this has been shown in a lot of scientific studies and psychological studies, where Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talks about the flow state. Dan Pink talks about drive, autonomy, mastery, and purpose being those things that get us to flow state. And so what we see is the most enjoyable work that we can do is intrinsic valued work, where we get to determine what we want to do and put that out to the world. And soul makes a very unique distinction that what our intrinsic values are and what we put into the world isn't necessarily a purpose, but a spark. And I find this language very, very interesting. In Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, he does a lot of the same. He says that, inherently, that the purposelessness of life that is ostensive doesn't have to run that deep. The nihilism that we all can face by thinking that life does not have any inherent meaning is not necessarily true. We can go in and we can assign meaning when we work from our intrinsic values, when we work from a flow state, when we are people who want to leave the world in a better place and make community feels like Alderian psychology calls us to. And I find that Carl Jung and Freud, how their premises of power or pleasure are the way that the world works, are very, very different from Viktor Frankl and Alfred Adler, in the fact that they are more about community and purpose. And it just kind of shows that a lot of times we put very, very heavy expectations on the meanings of things. And we are very, very light when it comes to the experience of life. And so what soul tries to do, it tries to rectify this overindulgence in hyper meaning and really going into almost weird places of what I would call teleology and epistemology, in order for us to kind of extract what this world means instead of actually experiencing it. So Soul is one of those movies that asks you to take stock of what you love to do, why you love to do it, and to pursue that with intention and experience. The fourth movie about internal narrative is, I would say, something that has influenced other movies and maybe even the capstone or the catalyst to the slow film, feel good, slice of life romantic comedies. It's Larry Crowne, and it is directed by Tom Hanks. And in this movie, Larry Crowne is a Navy veteran, and he works at a big box store. And because he never went to college, he was only able to rise up to, higher management. But when economic downturn happens, Larry is pretty much laid off and has to figure out life for himself. As he downsizes his life, he sells his big suburban home, as he sells his huge gas-guzzling GMC Suburban, he moves into a small apartment and gets a little motorcycle, essentially, just to zip around town. And he realizes that he does have enough savings to go to school and learn how the world works. And what I love about this is very, very key. One thing that Larry Crowne does is it kind of leaves a blueprint for if you ever find yourself in an unfamiliar situation. You need to change your context. You need to change and update your mental models of how the world works. And so the way that Larry Crowne did that was by going to school. And not only going to school, he actually adopts a younger crowd of friends. And having this younger crowd of friends actually influences the way that he thinks. And Larry, in my personal opinion, he becomes a bit cooler and he becomes a bit more what I would consider attractive to the opposite sex. He was single, and so his transformation allowed him to mature in areas of life that he never matured in. And so this really tackles that big idea of how do you change when the world changes? Because the world does change. Economic downturns do happen. We do lose people in our life, or situations and circumstances happen to where we're going to spend massive amounts of time away from the people we love or the home that we grew up in. There are so many different variables that can happen in life. And what I love about the internal narrative of Larry Crown in this movie is it just gives you a really straight blueprint of not being afraid to change your context or your subtext or your community or what you believe about the economy or anything that you believe. And I feel that this movie was a catalyst to the fifth and final movie here, which is The Chef by Jon Favreau. And what I find interesting about Larry Crown and The Chef, these are slice of life movies. It's not this epic odyssey. It is not something that is action packed. It's just something that's very normal. It's very mundane. It is very everyday. There is no crossing over into the unknown world or the fantasy world in like The Hero's Journey, The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. And I feel what this does is it makes internal narrative a lot more accessible. For example, like if you just lost your job and 2025 is looking very bad, I would say go check out Larry Crown. Go check out The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. It is showing these men, and I'm sorry the archetype is men. I wish there were some better movies that had female protagonists who were going through the same thing. But I will say I do think that females inherently follow a different path than what has been laid out in Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces or The Hero's Journey. And so it should inherently be different. But all that to say is that these movies can really, really help move the internal narrative forward. The Chef by Jon Favreau comes at this really interesting time. It comes in 2013, and he's just come off two very, very successful movies, Iron Man 1 and Iron Man 2. He did not come back for Iron Man 3, which was Shane Black. And he talked about that in some interviews. And what was really fascinating, I love Marvel movies. There's no Marvel movie about internal narrative. All the Marvel movies are really just popcorn movies, and they're not deep or philosophical or psychological in any way. But what I found interesting was how he talked about how Kevin Feige had such control over the universe that not much was going to change. And so when you look at Iron Man 1, Iron Man 2, and Iron Man 3, I would say they're on par. Iron Man 3 was not as good as the first two. But you could chalk that up to writing or production. I would say in the director's chair, maybe Jon Favreau would have brought something else to the table. But the rumblings behind the scenes in Hollywood were that he was working on a movie called Magic Kingdom. And essentially Magic Kingdom was like the other Ben Stiller movie, The Museum, where the museum comes to life, where essentially all the IP would get out in the parks and start to interact with each other. And I found this to be just an amazingly brilliant idea. You can pull from so much lore from historical, the theme parks of Disney World, Disneyland, Epcot. It's a genius idea. I don't know why Disney isn't moving on it. Maybe because it feels like it's too close in time with, the museum, or maybe they're developing it further. I have no idea, but I've known that this movie has really not been talked about since The Jungle Book. And The Jungle Book was Jon Favreau's attempt to get Magic Kingdom back in action. The reason I tell you all of these things is because Jon Favreau historically is a guy who thinks about big budget films. He thinks about wowing people. He is not a small potatoes thinker. And so when I mention The Chef by Jon Favreau, you might be thinking, that movie's weird. It's different. It's not like anything that he's ever done before. If you look at his other work, Elf, like he just tells these grandiose, funny movies. And The Chef really has an inciting incident, but it doesn't go into the hero's journey in a historic way. And so the story is a Michelin star chef gets into a fight with a food critic, and he gets fired from his job. And being fired from his job, he decides to pursue what he loves, and that's just making food. And so from that, he essentially just goes and gets a food truck. And the food truck allows him to spend some time with his son. And during summer, they go all the way down from Los Angeles, to other parts of, the south of America, south of the United States of America. And it's there that they start to bond. And not only do they start to bond, but they start to create a community via Twitter of people who are foodies and who love, what the chef is doing. And so again, you see like Tom Hanks and Larry Crown, you see Jon Favreau playing the main character. You see this as a slice of life film. You see it slowing down as a feel good movie. But what's very, very interesting is I feel that there is a subtext here in Hollywood. And that subtext is that we all need to slow down. We all need to take these moments and take control of life for ourselves. One of my favorite books is On the Shortness of Life by Seneca. And Seneca talks about how we should be very, very, I would consider, like, the word tight isn't the best word, but very observant of our time. And being observant of our time, Seneca talks about how we'll be observant with our money, with our property. But when it comes to time, people can just trample all over that. People can grab that. People can say, I'm going to pay you this amount for this. And when it comes to time, in the Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, I believe he talks in chapter 6 that the best way for wealth and riches to grow is that you have an autonomy of time. The autonomy of time allows for the exploration of many, many different things. And you see this movie, The Chef, is almost, if you were to put The Chef right next to the Psychology of Money, it is another one of those beautiful, beautiful moments of how would you start a business? How would you promote your business? How would you take seriously the call to be your own boss? And so The Chef is the fifth movie on this list about internal narrative. I find it very, very fascinating. And so that's my list for movies about internal narrative. I hope there's been something that will spark an idea or spark something for you to go check these out and to do a couple of things. One is to slow down. I think slowing down is really, really important. There's some great books around slowing down that you could check out. Slow Productivity by Cal Newport, Oliver Burkeman's 4,000 Weeks, and John Mark Comer's The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry are three great books in three different domains that I think would benefit your soul well from slowing down. The second is to think about feeling good in a whole other way. Sanka Arns, in one of his most recent books, I think it's called Smart Notes, he looks at Nicholas Lehmann. And as Nicholas Lehmann is a famous German who just was probably, one of the most productive human beings on the planet. And that's a verifiable fact. You can go and look at how much he wrote, 70 books, 400 papers. Like, this man was just a system machine of content and content creation. But what he says is that he would never work unless he knew exactly what to do. And to that point, he said, I only work when I know when to work. And if I falter for a moment, I put the matter aside and find something else to do. So he was not somebody who is pushing themselves to create this massive amount of work. It was just the intrinsic value allowed him to pour out great, great works. And so as How to Take Smart Notes and Sanka Arns talks about Nicholas Luhmann, one thing that's really, really important about this whole thing is feeling good is very, very vital to our productivity, to our well-being. And one of the things that made Nicholas Luhmann one of the best and most productive persons was this idea of deflecting resistance. Like, when resistance would come, he wouldn't wallow in it. He wouldn't grapple with it. It would be like judo. He would pull it and say, no, you're going this direction. I'm not going to feel resistance. Let me task switch on purpose, do something that is going to make me feel good. If you want some other feel-good books, How to Take Smart Notes by Sanka Arns is good, and Ali Abdaal's Feel Good Productivity is probably the pivotal when it comes to the feel-good movement. And finally, slice of life, taking a moment to where you can observe your own slice of life. I would say, for me, that has been through bullet journaling, and that has been through community service. Those two things have been so integral in me really living in the moments that I can. And so the bullet journal has helped me with my ADD. It's helped me with my productivity and focus. I have a couple of other, videos that you could check on this YouTube channel. If you're listening to this, on your favorite podcast, you can go check out any of my YouTube videos. Just search Nick Ovalla, Nickovalle, and you'll come across my channel. And there we have a video about the 1, 2, 3, 4 method, and finding your first journal for productivity as a productivity system. Those are things that have helped the slice of life. Finally, just volunteering somewhere, being able to give back to community. What I find is through all of these movies that a community feel is top of mind. And that community feel is something that you only get when you invest in relationship with others. So if you're struggling with relationships, the only thing that I could say, because this is my context, but I will say, look for a run club in your neighborhood, join a gym, Soul Cycle, CrossFit. Those are very, very interconnected gyms. And some of the philosophy and values behind that is that community actually matters. So go check that out. Finally, I have created something for you that I think would help you in your internal narrative. It's at storybetter.co. Storybetter.co. There is a 90 days. This is not slow and this is not productive, but it is something that will change your internal narrative. When you can start to take control of your actions, when you can start to take control of your diet, and when you can start to fill your brain with a reading list that is going to inform internal narrative, you are going to be set up for success. Go to storybetter.co today, drop in your email, and you're going to get a 90-day plan that is going to help you find a great diet, that's going to help you exercise twice a day, and also read for 10 minutes a day. That's going to influence your mind, your body, and have an effect on your soul, so that your internal narrative is going to be top notch. If you have any questions for me, you can hit me up on any of the social media at Nick_Ovalla. I hope you check out storybetter.co. And until we chat again, I hope you tell the world a great story. Peace.